Order, order. Well, welcome everybody to the latest meeting of the Environmental Audit Committee, part of our review, the last session within our review into marine governance. I'm very pleased to be joined by our panellists today. Could I first welcome to you all, could I first encourage you just to introduce yourselves, your organisation and your role, please, starting with you, Ms Thomas.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here today. My name's Olivia Thomas. I'm the Head of Planning and Technical at the Crown Estate, part of Marine's leadership, looking at how we de-risk and enable opportunities for the long-term management of the seabed.
Thank you very much, Ms Willis.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for having me. My name's Michelle Willis. I'm the Chief Executive of the Marine Management Organisation. Our organisation is the principal marine regulator for marine management in England.
Very much, Mr O'Hara.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Ronan O'Hara. I represent Crown Estate Scotland, which is a Scottish public body, and my position is that of Chief Executive.
Well, thank you very much for joining us. Can I start starting on my left with yourself, Ms Thomas? Can I ask you, what would you summarise as the main gaps in the government's current approach to marine planning in the UK?
Thank you. I think it's important to recognise the significant progress that's happened with respect to policy and legislation, really reflecting the constrained sea space, so multiple competing demands. And I think if I see an opportunity or the challenge we're seeking to address, it's really to move from project by project decision making to a place where we can unlock and afford opportunity for addressing big system-wide issues at a national level.
Thank you. Ms Willis, same question to you. What do you see as the main gaps?
So I think for marine management and marine plans, the success has been actually the MMO implemented the plans, which were the first plans in the world. We did it first in 2014 with the East Plan. It's evolving. It's an evolving picture at the moment. Obviously, since 2014 and since the organisation was created, there's a lot of competing pressure for marine space, and we have to enable activities to happen in the right way and have the plans there to help decision makers make effective decisions. And I think understanding the new priorities across a range of government departments and trying to bring those priorities together is challenging, but can be done. And I believe we've worked collectively as government and with stakeholders to try and do that well, with better information, better shared understanding of what we need to achieve, and better outcome focused, but with a focus on balancing economic, social needs and also restoring nature.
Mr O'Hara, can you just explain the difference in terms of Scotland in comparison to your colleague from the Crown Estate in England in terms of that governance, and then what you see as the key gaps in the current government's approach there?
So in answering that question, it's appropriate, I think, to start with describing Crown Estate Scotland and the unique arrangements that exist in that jurisdiction. So post-Smith Commission and the decision by the UK Parliament to devolve increased powers to the Scottish Parliament in 2014, Crown Estate Scotland was subsequently established in 2017 to manage the Crown Estate in Scotland, or the Scottish Crown Estate. Our primary purpose in law is to maintain and seek to enhance the value of the estate, which is not dissimilar to our counterparts in England, Wales and Northern Ireland. We also have a statutory obligation to advance sustainable development, which is non-monetary benefits, social, environmental, as well as economic. And of course, we pay the net surplus revenues derived from the Scottish Crown Estate to the Scottish Consolidated Fund. And I would highlight that no monies leave Scotland. They are retained in Scotland for the benefit of supporting and underpinning wider public spending, and it's probably also worth highlighting that none of the monies support the royal household. I think our role is very much that of an asset manager, an investor and an enabler, and we take a commercial perspective as a commercial operator, but we are still very much part of the machinery of government, and we take and we are delighted to be able to support the deployment of Scottish policies on a wider basis. The opportunity, I believe, is in the fact that the devolved arrangement allows for many benefits and a closer integration at central government in Scotland and local government in Scotland. But in the evolving policy landscape and the transition towards whole system-based policies, I think there is something about what I would describe as the evolution after devolution. How do we ensure that we have that cohesive, effective, four-nation approach?
Okay, I think we're potentially straying into topics that other people will be asking you about, so thank you for that opening answer. Bring in now Julia Buckley.
Thank you. So I'll start with you, Olivia Thomas. How can the government's current approach to marine planning be improved to achieve that balance between the social, economic and environmental demands that we've touched on?
Thank you. I think we're starting to see the emergence of more spatially specific planning, and by that the underpinning, how we share that underpinning evidence that help us take those balanced decisions across the economic, the social and the environmental. We at the Crown Estate, we're building that shared evidence base and seeking to work in that statutory framework and with our colleagues across the table on the panel here to really start to take informed decisions with respects to achieving UK-wide agendas around nature recovery, energy security and ensuring we drive value on behalf of the nation. So that spatial specificity we're seeing come through the Marine Spatial Prioritisation Programme, and we're using our tooling and our capability through our Marine Delivery Route Map to help navigate both the policy decisions that are led by government through to then delivery of the action that takes place on the ground.
So if we were trying to translate that to somebody who's not a specialist, would you say that you're talking about more localised parts of the map, drilling down to that smaller detail in terms of geographic space?
I think in every local area, so we have the ability to look at 1 kilometre scale, and in every area, on balance, look at the opportunities.
Sorry, please carry on.
We have the opportunity to look at the balance of economic and natural environmental information and the multiple needs and demands over that particular piece of space.
So is that a key recommendation, to keep working at that more localised level so that we do get those nuances?
I believe we should still work at national scale, but have the ability to use tooling like the Marine Delivery Route Map to help understand, as we take a decision spatially, how it contributes to achieving those overall outcomes.
It's really helpful for us as a committee, trying to find those pathways forward to try and improve this. I do think you've already answered the question, Miss Willis, unless you want to add anything further about that balance.
I think what I would like to highlight really is that we do need to work better across government, and we are doing that. So from a marine management organisation, we see ourselves very much as a facilitator in bringing those organisations together. You know, you'll have seen with the British Energy Security Strategy and more recently with the Strategic Spatial Energy Plans, there's more need to get greater alignment because everybody wants to be quite specific about their needs. But place-based, we have geographic plans which are in 6 locations, deliberately to take account of those really important local needs, but also it allows us at that local level to feed into the national picture to allow better decisions strategically to be made. But there is always more we can do. But, you know, policies are in different places at the moment, and we just need to help navigate around that and work better together and bring that integration so we can make better decisions and have those shared outcomes and be that much outcome focused as a system.
Almost a call for that cross-referencing between
Yes.
parallel strategies. Is that something you'd like to see different departments of government do?
Yes, we are working with other government departments. We work very closely with DESNES and MHCLG and the Crown Estate and other partners to try and build that picture.
Cross-reference each other before you get into the room would be quite helpful.
That's exactly that.
Thank you. Okay, and yourself, Mr O'Hara, how can we get that balance between the economic, social and the environment? You know, what improvements do we need to see?
So in Scotland, Crown Estate Scotland, actually, as a creature statute, the underpinning legislation requires us to implement and, where possible, advance sustainable development, environmental, social and economic in combination. As a public body, of course, we comply with Green Book methodology, which makes provisions and evaluations for investment and decision making around all of that. But one of the features of the management operation in Scotland is that we have sought to decentralise. We deploy our staff base across the Highlands and Islands of Scotland as well as in the Central Belt in Edinburgh. And we maintain and work hard to have deep collaborative relationships where the assets serve and support communities. And in doing so, we are taking into account that local perspective in turning the estate to account. And it's also, of course, integrated within our value system as a corporation, as a public corporation. I think our place within the machinery of government in Scotland then also allows for that lateral collaboration and interaction across government departments as well centrally.
You sound like your best practice example that you want your English colleagues to replicate.
Not for me to say.
Okay, we've pretty much covered off this next question, but I will just check in with Olivia Thomas whether, how does the government work with your organisations to ensure effective marine planning? I know you've talked about the new spatial planning, but is there anything else in there specifically on the planning side that you think is worth mentioning?
I suppose mainly just the focus on how we build a coherent evidence base that underpins both the statutory planning and then plays through to how we then deliver off the back of the policies and the plan's requirements. So we've got several examples of how we've worked in partnership with government and other leading organisations, things like the Offshore Wind Evidence and Change Programme. So that identified those critical evidence gaps for when we need to develop more offshore wind in an increasingly busy space. It targeted the evidence that was needed, and then by working with government we were able to look at areas for potential change, whether that's updating policy or reflecting the evidence back into marine plans.
Do you feel there's enough resource to fulfil these additional requirements to find the evidence?
I think it's important that we invest in a way that brings that connectivity across organisations. So where we are investing, we are contributing to the statutory planning system as much as relying on it. I think it's fair to say that resourcing is always going to be a challenge, but we can be more efficient through partnerships and collaboration.
Super, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Barry Gardner.
Thank you, Chair. If I could ask you, Ms Willis, you said that you work very closely with DESNES. Last month they published the Building the North Sea's Energy Future consultation. Did you work closely with them on that? Because that consultation document talks about the transition from oil and gas to clean energy, but it doesn't seem to focus on the challenges of marine spatial planning.
We didn't work as close as we could have done, but I would need to come back to the committee with a bit more information on that specific consultation.
Right. Ms Thomas, what about yourselves?
I think there's absolutely recognition that working with the Clean Power mission and across government, it's a cross-government objective to achieve a transition and secure energy for the nation.
Yes, of course. No, I was asking what involvement you'd had in that consultation document.
So not in the development of the consultation document, but we are actively working with the Department for Energy in the outcomes.
Thank you. I'd like almost to do a Bamber Gascoigne and sort of divide you up, give you each your starter for 10, but with no conferring on the next one. Because what I want to ask is, whereas one of you is responsible for the licensing in the seabed, owning the leases, it's the regulator who has the statutory planning. So what I want to know is how you coordinate with each other to make sure that you're not simply looking at the revenue stream that the Crown Estates will get from this in the short term, but you are looking at a balanced long-term view of the environmental sustainability of the seabed. So Shall I start with you, Miss Willis, and then see if Miss Thomas can block her ears for a moment, whether it coincides with what she says?
Yeah. So, from an MMO perspective, we do work closely with the Crown Estate on how they do plan future development and future activities, and say more so now with that complete intention as we've set out. We have been closely all working on marine spatial prioritisation. There was a programme to kind of help better build up a data and an evidence base in order to help inform that decision making from a regulatory perspective, but also to support better decision making on how the use of the seabed could be used. And we all fed into that, and we worked with other partners. From a regulatory perspective, we aren't always the primary lead decision maker. I think the other thing we need to remember is for nationally significant infrastructure projects, MMO is the statutory consultee, and it's PINs which basically lead on that decision making, but we feed into that. I think in terms of where we go forward, much of the work that we do with the Crown Estates, you rely on habitats regulations, and they do satisfy us of that when they're taking, nature into account and trying to come up with ideas of where things can be done in a sensible place-based space. And we do kind of work together in various programs of work, because if we don't work together like that, we won't make the best decisions, and we won't have an effective marine planning framework and the policies within it. So it's not just the relationship between the MMO and the Crown Estate, it is the relationship between all of us with all of those bodies who are taking forward activities in that space that we have to navigate that land to sea transition and understand the supply chain, so we can understand the effect not just for development but for nature, and then the local considerations economically.
Okay, well, we'll come to the local consideration.
Yeah.
Ms. Thomas, yes.
Thank you. So if I'm to build on that, I suppose, from the Crown Estate's perspective, we use the statutory marine planning framework as our foundation, and that guides us. It sets that government direction, as do the UK-wide national policy statements and other considerations we have. We then use the marine delivery route map and that shared evidence base to help inform how we deliver into that space, and how and who we work in partnership with to deliver in a coordinated way. So for me, that's a very complementary role, but with clear responsibilities. And I think it's the opportunity we have in having this shared outcomes and shared objectives to a certain extent, but very clear, distinct responsibilities.
Okay, so the 45 to 50 gigawatts that the government has predicated of offshore wind by 2030, how is that influencing your leasing process? And how are you coordinating with government to ensure that those leases are available? But how are you doing it in such a way that it's not impacting on marine protected areas that are already established under the marine spatial planning?
We're actually working with the government-led marine spatial prioritisation programme, so that cross-departmental initiative. Government and ministers will be directing those areas. They're using the evidence base we're providing through the marine delivery route map to help look at that problem statement exactly, which is how do we find space for the development of more offshore wind, but in areas that have minimum impact or preferably enable nature to both recover and thrive. So it's a journey we're going on at the moment to really try and ensure we aren't in a place where it is wind and then everything else at the consequence of it. We're actually looking to use that balanced evidence base to appraise then the best areas, the best for both technically and viability from a wind perspective on a balance of cost and cost to consumer, but also then the locations that really are those marine protected areas that need recovery and where we need to make space for nature.
Thank you. So for an offshore wind project, there are separate processes for seabed leasing, marine consents, landfall, and the onshore construction activity. But there's actually very little opportunity for the affected communities to participate in the decision-making until the operations go through the terrestrial planning, which actually could come long after the consents that you've given have been made. So going back to what you were saying about community involvement, how do you think that squares up with getting local communities, coastal communities involved in what you're doing?
I think we recognise the opportunity by being able to take a national approach as to how we design our leasing offer. So if I were to use the example of a live process, so I can't talk about it in the specifics, but we have in the Celtic Sea a process running at the moment to enable future floating offshore wind. Part of the mechanism and how we've designed it is that we will work with developers to provide us a view of what community benefit their projects will bring and have those conversations with community at the outset of that design rather than waiting until it is a project ready to develop. And there are lots of examples where we are working with the community through social enterprise initiatives like the Sea Rangers, who are people who are trained to go out and spot birds and marine mammals, through to then engineering programs that we're running with local communities, again working out those contributions that we can make that really amplify community benefit through the design of what we do.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Samuel Wilson.
Hey, just following on from the point that you've made, all of the thrust of government policy at the moment, whether it's the net zero targets have set and the amount of renewable energy they want to see generated, the way in which they're seeking to circumvent some of the planning objections through the infrastructure bill, or indeed the recent Crown Estates bill, which actually was quite specific that the government expected the Crown Estate to play a role, an important role, in the delivery of offshore wind generation. Given all of those things, while you indicate that you make your own decisions, etc., is there not significant pressure now on the Crown Estates to slot into a policy which may well have a detrimental impact on the marine environment, have an impact on local communities, and also on other activities, other economic activities which people have got in the area where wind farms might be proposed?
I think whilst we are absolutely set up to deliver government policy, including those priorities for offshore wind, we are very much defined by our statute, which is to create that shared and lasting prosperity for the value of the nation. That is value across seabed management for the long term, across multiple different sectors and demands. So our leasing and licensing of specific activities over the seabed, when we think about value, it includes space we make for nature and other activities as well, such as aggregate industry, the telecommunications infrastructure, etc. So we have to take a balanced decision as how we manage the activities that we run for the long term. So even where offshore wind needs space, that guidance and direction from government through the spatial prioritisation programme and using our marine delivery route map, we'll be able to take a balanced decision rather than one that biases just in favour of delivering one outcome.
If I could just ask one extra supplementary to what you've just been speaking about. You talked about the floating offshore wind platforms. I'm just wondering why, given that there would be such significant reduction in seabed detriment, why we wouldn't be actually waiting for the technology to improve before we implement offshore wind in other places. I'm thinking obviously particularly of my own constituency, but also elsewhere.
I think this is where we have the balance of seeking to address both policy and market ambition, and the opportunity that we worked to create was both to address and respond to the markets that are developing technologies that would like the opportunity to continue to develop. We have test and demonstration as well as the larger scale, but equally there is policy need. So there is a commitment to develop floating offshore wind as part of the wider mix for offshore wind, and that's the journey we've been on in order to enable it.
How far off do you think we are before large-scale rollout?
So our process will run through the course of this year. We are then just the beginning of that process where the developers will need to go on and achieve their statutory consents. And so in a few years' time, I would say that we'll start to see that market realised offshore.
Appreciate that, thank you.
I can bring Sammy Wilson back in. Yeah.
Okay. I know that you can't talk about specific projects, but there is one project, and I really just want to find out about the process by which people can have their input. Large wind farm being proposed. Actually, it's on Scottish Crown Estate land. It's off the shore of Northern Ireland. It will be adjacent to a World Heritage Site, our biggest tourist attraction, the Giant's Causeway. And I just want to know, what's the process where really the decision is being made by another administrations in Scotland? The Crown Estate Scotland will be responsible for the leasing of the seabed there. There is generation is devolved to the Northern Ireland Assembly. What's the process where there's perhaps a clash between two administrations, one wanting to protect a vital tourist, our biggest tourist infrastructure, and on the other hand an opportunity to generate offshore wind which might have an impact, not on seabed, but in this case on the tourist industry?
I mean, the process starts way before where we are at this point in time, which is ultimately the regulation of the seabeds in Scotland were and are managed by the Scottish Government Marine Directorate. And the process of governing the seabed in that jurisdiction adopts a tiered model of a national marine plan going down to local marine plans, which ultimately feed into the process of consultation that supported offshore wind leasing in Scotland. Consultation, as far as I'm aware, in any jurisdiction is open to all stakeholders, irrespective of geography. But ultimately, the process is one where we, as the manager of the seabed, take a plan-led approach. So we look to the administration as to how we would and what would be permissible and deemed reasonable and appropriate to take forward in practice for a leasing round. I think the wider inter-jurisdictional aspects is, to be honest, not something that I could comment on in great detail today, but I'm very happy to take that away and look at it and provide a response.
And in the case where, and I don't know what the impact on the seabed and what environmental assessment has been carried out so far on the proposed project, but in the case where it's not just the seabed is affected, but it's actually a vital economic activity on an area which will be impacted by the development. What kind of consideration would Crown Estate Scotland give that, or is it simply what is the impact on Scotland and communities adjacent to it in Scotland, not communities adjacent to it in Northern Ireland?
So I think, as previously stated, on the interjurisdictional aspects, that is not necessarily something that I feel I could comment on today. But what I could say and can say is that the process is such that consideration is given to environmental implications, habitat implications, and feedback from communities, and that those consultation processes, as far as I'm aware, are open and unfettered for all.
Thank you very much. Martin Rhodes.
Thank you. Mr. O'Hara, to follow up in terms of, obviously in terms you mentioned the role of Crown Estate Scotland in terms of as a public body in Scotland. How do decisions made by the UK government impact marine spatial planning within Scotland, despite those devolved responsibilities?
So I'm going to repeat myself slightly, but just for the purposes of clarity, I think consenting, regulating and managing of seabeds generally sits with the Scottish Administration and the Marine Directorate. But I think in terms of where you have this interplay between UK matters versus devolved matters, or indeed reserved matters versus devolved matters, my sense is that particularly over the last year or so, that has become more prevalent and pronounced. And I think examples that come to mind would be concepts such as the role of the North Sea Transition Authority in carbon capture, utilisation and storage. I think there's something in relation to, for example, as already mentioned today, the recent Crown Estate Bill, which secures additional investment in borrowing powers and other matters for the Crown Estate and the estate in the jurisdictions of England, Wales and Northern Ireland. That, by way of example, is not something that the estate in Scotland will benefit from. Generally speaking, my observation is as we deal with matters such as national energy security, that's an area which I alluded to earlier in my opening remarks, is an area for opportunity and improvement as to how we address that.
Mm-hmm. And how could that relationship between yourselves and the UK government in areas like that be improved? What would you, I mean, if we were to, as a committee, look at recommendations about how might that be, what sort of things would you like to see in those recommendations?
Well, the first thing I would say is that I do observe in practice good, strong cross-jurisdictional collaboration. Recently observed Michael Shanks and Deputy First Minister on stage together seeking to address investment. I know that officials work together. I suppose, on one hand, for myself, managing the Scottish Crown Estate, I'm not sure that we have ever codified or formally enabled the type of interaction occurring at an official level and ministerial level between my organisation and the Crown Estate, by way of example. I think there are synergies and opportunities there. I also think that the recent the SSEP, the Strategic Spatial Energy Plan coming from NESO, is an example of policy development starting to try and create a whole system approach and bring things together in a structured and coordinated fashion.
So one thing you would, in terms of think, would be an improvement with some way of, what you say, codifying those interactions to actually have more formal structures in place, whereby, or processes in place rather than structures.
Quite possibly.
Yeah, okay, thank you. In terms of since the creation of Crown Estate Scotland, do you think you have reached the sort of the benefits, gained the benefits that was envisaged in terms of the redistribution of revenue from seabed leasing activities, for instance, to local communities?
I think in short, yes. To bring that to life, since the evolution, we have generated and returned 270 million net surplus revenues to the Scottish Consolidated Fund to underpin public sector spending. Of that, circa 63 million has been returned to 26 local authorities in Scotland. But there is an opportunity to go further, and like all businesses, the more you put back in, the more you get back out.
So one of the things you would like to see is that, for that to go further in terms of that relationship with local communities?
At a local community level, we, for example, have sustainable community funds where we've returned 1.7 million to local groups to advance everything from peat restoration to undertaking feasibility studies for community housing. We would love to do more in that space.
Thank you.
Alistair Carmichael.
Thank you very much, Chair. The relationship with the UK government, we now have a situation where your colleagues south of the border, or will have after the Crown Estate Bill passes, have access to Treasury guarantees, but you as the Crown Estate Scotland will not. Now, the Treasury is a UK-wide authority. Is that going to put you at a position of some disadvantage?
So Since 2017, there is naturally divergence and change within the various jurisdictions. Our starting position is that the capitalisation of the estate in Scotland is controlled by Scottish ministers. There's a different arrangement there, so we already have a slightly different level of funding. And then if you extend that through to borrowing powers derived from Treasury, if we are without those, we will obviously be somewhat disadvantaged.
And the bill actually is about guarantees for borrowing as well, is it not?
It is, yes.
So, in your view, is there any reason why you couldn't have access to these same borrowing powers and guarantees? And the fact that nobody thought about it when they were drafting the bill?
I think the bill was very specific for...
It's very specific
for particular jurisdictions. I suppose ultimately this is probably more to do with treatments of monies evolving beyond the current arrangement and presumably Barnett consequentials. Mm. But I would have thought conceptually that if Treasury was receptive to the idea of lending to the Scottish Crown Estate and Crown Estate Scotland, that we would put those monies to good use.
That's helpful, thank you. Can I just drill down a bit, though, into the circumstances around the first leasing round for Scotland? Because you'll recall that that was the subject of some controversy at the time. Who designed that auction system? Was it yourselves or the Scottish Government?
It was ultimately a system designed by Crown Estate Scotland in consultation and taking on board the views of other stakeholders and indeed what was occurring globally and of course the unique circumstances that prevail within the Scottish jurisdiction and the unique geography of Scotland.
No, you had an auction
Yep.
and you capped the maximum bid in the auction. I've never heard of that being done anywhere else. Why did you choose a cap?
So one, it was a reflection of the strategic objective set that underpinned the leasing round, which was ultimately to create a very strong pipeline with critical mass of a scale that was world class that would ultimately deliver a world leading marketplace. It reflected our understanding of market conditions and the risk of the desire to reflect the constraints that are associated with bringing forward the investment opportunity in Scotland.
You got that calculation right?
I would suggest that we did. I would suggest it was evidence-based, it was methodical, it was fact-based, but I would also suggest that the nature of the market at present would suggest that we positioned that correctly.
You could maybe do it better in the future?
I wouldn't say that.
Differently then?
Things can always be different in the future.
Okay. I mean, you talk about global comparators there, but there was an auction round in New York at much the same time, wasn't there? Mm-hmm. Now, your auction round raised 700 million. Is that correct?
755.
755 million, I stand corrected. Do you know the scope of that auction round in New York and what it realised?
I have heard it in the past. I could not recall the exact figures right now.
If I suggested to you that it was an auction for an area about a quarter of the size that was auctioned in Scotland and that it realised an income for New York of 4.3 billion, would that be about right?
That sounds about right.
That's about right. So, given what you can see is possible, where you have a different system in New York, do you still think that the judgments that you made in that first leasing round were correct?
I do. I genuinely do, and it comes back to a house in a salubrious environment and postcode will not attract the same money as a house in a less desirable.
You think our seabed is less worth than New York's?
I think our seabed has world-class opportunity, but I also recognise the fact that we have practical considerations such as the terrain, the geography, the route to market, the grid, all of those factors. And when we seek to price anything, market conditions and risk all feed into deriving a pricing point.
Why did you put a cap on the amount that could be bid? Surely the whole point of a commercial auction is that the commercial players make the decision on what they can afford themselves.
So part of the rationale was, again, balancing social, economic and environmental considerations. So the actual design of the leasing scheme was such that it facilitated developers to make supply chain development commitments in a way that changed the nature of delivery, and so it was a fundamentally different offering.
Maybe those should have been decisions for the bidders themselves.
I think we assessed the market, took evidence, and made a decision.
Have you ever heard of another auction with a cap on the bids?
I'm sure.
Plenty with floors.
Yeah. I'm sure they're out there.
But you're not in a position to offer me one.
Not right now. Very happy to come back to you on that point.
Up for the benefit of this committee and correspondence. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Alison Taylor.
Thank you, Chair. Ms Willis, if I can address the next section of questions to you. With the government pushing for offshore wind development, what steps are being taken to ensure that you have the necessary expertise and resources to effectively manage marine licensing and environmental impact assessments?
So, the marine licensing service that we do provide, we train our staff very well. In fact, we train our staff so well that developers then come and take our staff. So we must do that right. So from our perspective, the service we provide in line with Treasury guidelines is that we have to recover costs through fees and charges. We're probably not at full cost recovery currently, and we are waiting for government to come and consult on changes to that. But we don't just do that through changes through fees and charges. We also have the opportunity to consider things like exemptions, of which we've done to try and improve the regulatory regime and framework from when the organisation was vested back in 2010 to date. We've done quite a lot of activity in that way where we can to improve. But in terms of resourcing, we have scaled up. We have, for example, created a strategic renewables unit. That unit kind of works between the marine licensing consenting team and the marine planning team that brings together in a more integrated way plans and consent and decision making. We do a lot of work with MHCLG and NSIPs to better be on the front foot to kind of understand the pipeline of applications that we're due to get, so we can better start. The forward planning isn't something that industry does as well as it could with us, but we are making much better progress with industry engagement through Seabed Users Group and representatives on that take a system and a programme approach. We do have a very good evidence base. We invest and we partner with various research institutions, so when we are making decisions around that are based on the marine plans, we do take account of all of, we can run ranges of projects to take account of socio-economic impact. So in terms of the approach, it isn't just about the people, it's about the way in which we kind of resource ourselves to make those good decisions. So I just think it's important to recognise that. But, undoubtedly, we do require a skilled workforce. The habitats regulations and the environment regulations can be complicated and are a really important factor in decision making, as is taking scientific advice and the advice of statutory consultees. As I say, our workforce has increased over the last few years to kind of scale up in preparation for the pipeline. But as I say, we do have a degree of churn. We seem to get our staff to a point that they're effective, and then we, like I say, we lose them. The other important point to note that one of our resource challenges has been, for many years, we've been working with a system we inherited from the oil and gas sector to do to kind of interface with our customers. That is out of support now, and we have secured through spend and review investment to improve that system. We have a marine licensing programme, which is to bring not only to bring together the systems but changes in the ways in which we work. That is to improve the efficiency and the effectiveness of the service we provide. So there is investment that we have secured to improve it, but a lot of the work isn't just about that technical facets. We are working much more closely with industry, port sector, energy sector to try and better get that forecast so we can engage much more upfront. The better quality applications we have, the more we can do at a greater pace.
Thank you very much. What steps are you taking to further facilitate and enable marine restoration projects through licensing, particularly those community-led projects, to make it more accessible and affordable? And again, Ms Willis, if you could follow on with that answer there.
Yes, of course. The difficulty with some of these projects is that the Marine and Coastal Access Act is quite specific in the activities in which we have to licence and give permissions to. And unfortunately, the type of application, and we don't charge we charge on the activity, not on the type of applicant. So we do recognise there have been some challenges, particularly for charities, when they're trying to navigate the complexity of the regulations, the charging structures, and set out their projects in a very different way. We have done a lot of work through exemption. So as I touched on previously, in 2011, 2013 and 2019, we undertook exemption reviews to try and find different ways in which we could enable these activities to be done in a less complicated way. But for now, we still have to have regard for the legislation that we have to operate with, and that we recognise as challenging. We have been doing a lot more work in the community space and with in the more place-based considerations around how we can do that better with consultees. So we bring the consultees together with Environment Agency colleagues, Natural England, so we can help those applicants navigate this much more easily and look at ways in which we can enable them to do those activities. You will have seen today that the Corrie review has reported, and there are some recommendations in that will be taken away with government to look at things around constrained discretion. So we have noted that, but we are open to working more collaboratively to find better solutions to this challenge.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because we might have a couple of small follow-up questions on that, if you're comfortable to take them.
I'll do my best where I can.
Okay. No, well, obviously, if you don't feel you're able, I've just got one final question in this section, though, is what you might need from the spending review to enable these actions, and what will be the implications if you don't get what you need.
So we have secured investment into systems and processes, so I think that is helpful. I think from our perspective, we are thinking very differently about how we implement regulation. So we have to take that balance of ensuring that we enable things to happen and have that positive nature impact. So there is the opportunity, I think, to step back and ensure that we are interpreting regulation well. And that doesn't necessarily always need money. We have a fees and charges consultation, which we are waiting for government to consult on. That's with ministers. And we have, as I say, secured the investment we need. As I said earlier, the greatest challenge is that retention of resource, and the fact that government salary doesn't match necessarily to the private sector salaries, and that will always remain the challenge. But if we can work better with industry, we could do more to try and get sort of cross-pollination of resources, so they don't feel the need to necessarily come and recruit our staff.
Okay, thank you. So just referring to the Corrie report, do you think the recommendations on pay flexibility would help you, first of all, employ and retain some of the specialist staff you need, particularly in light of some of your earlier comments about I think
it's an opportunity we are open to exploring.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and a further comment from the Corrie report, will the recommendations on digitalisation in the review assist with any of your operations?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That is quite important. It's for the whole environment and having user-centric services, accessible, easy to use, and is something. And that integration is going to be quite key.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you haven't had a lot of time to consider all the recommendations. So if you want to follow up in writing on
more than happy to take that away and follow up in writing with some further examples.
Thank you very much, Ms Willis. Thank you, Chair.
You, Blake Stevenson.
Thank you. My first question is to all of you, please. To what extent will we achieve the 30 by 30 initiative? How are we currently performing against that target, and what is needed to make more progress? Can I start maybe on the left, Olivia Thomas?
Yes, thank you. I think we've done a fantastic job as a nation of recognising the opportunity in terms of coverage. So the Marine Protected Area Network, I believe at sea, is around 38%. And actually, I think the journey we have to go on now, working with our statutory nature conservation bodies, environmental NGOs and others, is how we take advantage of the evidence and the data that we are collecting that underpins the state of nature within those marine protected areas, and looking at opportunities for connectivity across them so that we can really move into the space of nature recovery.
Michelle Willis?
So MMO has a significant role to play in supporting the meeting of government's targets on the Environmental Improvement Plan, specifically in relation to marine protected areas. MMO has and can introduce bylaws to control fishing for the purposes of conservation. Obviously, there's the jurisdiction issues between ourselves and the inshore Fisheries Conservation Authority, so we kind of share that space, but either way we use bylaws in order to enable that protection and restoration to happen. So we are seeing positive progress being made in that space. You'll be aware that MMO has implemented already on behalf of government the Stage 1 and Stage 2 marine protected areas, and we have completed much of the work which is with government now for Stages 3, and we're about to produce Stage 4. So I think the only thing I would highlight is that we must remember that some of the marine protected areas currently are very much feature specific, so the next round of Stage 3 will kind of rebalance some of that and help, bring in we'll revisit some of the protected areas in Stage 3 because it'll be less feature specific and more encompassing.
Yeah, so I think you said there that you've completed much of Stages 3 and 4. How much? So how far are we from completing it?
Stage 3, we've undertaken all the preparatory work and the evidence and the analysis, and that's now with government to progress.
Okay.
Stage 4, we've broadly completed the consultation work and the evidence base, and we're preparing that to submit to government.
And has that work taken longer than you would have expected? And are there any lessons learned?
It has taken longer than expected. I think the lessons we need to learn are much more around how we gather some of that evidence. There is a complex picture, and obviously there are a range of needs. I think it would be wrong to say that we don't recognise the need for the protection. It's how do you balance the protection but allowing some activity to happen. I think it's fair to say there might be a misconception that no activity can happen, where actually some activity can happen. It's just it needs to be done in line with the conservation measures and the bylaws that we put in place.
Okay, I'll come back to you if I can on Stages 1 and 2 in a second, but Ronan, I wonder if you could just answer my original question, please.
So obviously, in my capacity here today, representing Crown Estate Scotland, I do not speak for Scottish Government. But my understanding is that the nation of Scotland is committed to the 30 by 30 commitments. There are frameworks in place and they're delivering against those. And but as is the case, I'm sure, in all four nations, these are challenging targets. And we see the tension between environmental interests and commercial interests. And we also see increasing spatial squeeze for access and use of the marine environment.
Okay. So going back to Michelle Willis, going back to stages 1 and 2, if I can, what are you doing to monitor the effectiveness of protecting the marine environment due to the measures that were introduced with those stages?
So from a compliance point of view, it's been really important to recognise that we've got a range of tools which we can use. VMS is one of the primary tools, but obviously we've got aerial surveillance which we can target at specific high-risk areas, and we also have offshore surveillance. So we have a range of assets and technology which we are using to help with that. I just thought it would be helpful to share some examples. In stage 1, we have had about 9 advisory notices in those advisory notices. So just to put some perspective, in a compliance world, we do the education and, signposts, and that you might just be in the wrong area at the wrong time, and we do the advisory, then we look to escalate through to a point of enforcement. So the education piece is quite important for behavioural change. But it's just useful to understand that prior to the bylaws coming into place in stage 1, there was about 92 non-UK fishers in that space and 23 UK fishers in that space. So actually having 9 advisory notices in that space demonstrates positive, in our place, positive compliance, but we are looking at that there is a want to comply with that. Equally, in stage 2 areas, there was 300 UK fishing aspects of fishing activity, using in both cases using bottom towed gear, and 300 non-UK, and again we had 27 advisory notices, 3 of which have been escalated for further investigation. So that gives reassurance that we are actively looking at that, and we can't tell using the IVMS and VMS whether a vessel's just transitioning through the area or anchoring for shelter, or we can take a view on what that activity might be. We might necessarily be able to see fully what is happening there, but we've got indicators that allow us to at least go and look more closely.
So final question, because I know we're pushed for time, Chair. In terms of overall outcomes, would you say that those measures are effective, those compliance measures are effective?
I believe the bylaws are effective, but we will always review them. We'll keep them in check because you have to.
Yeah. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Well, can I take this opportunity on behalf of the committee to thank all 3 of you for the evidence that we've heard. Been a very useful session ahead of hearing from ministers. So thank you all, and I'll bring this session to a close. Order. The sitting is suspended. Order. Well, welcome to the second part of today's panel event into the marine global environment. Very pleased to be joined by Ministers Baroness Chapman and Minister Hardy and your officials. Can I first invite the four of you to just explain who you are and what your role is, please, starting on my left.
Hello, my name's Helen Mulvein. I'm the Deputy Director Ocean Policy in the Foreign Office, and I'm also the head of the legal team that advises on law of the sea matters.
Thank you very much.
I'm Jenny Chapman. I'm the Minister for International Development and also Latin America and the Caribbean.
I'm Emma Hardy. I'm the Minister for Water and Flooding, but I also have responsibilities for the ocean, for chemicals and pesticides.
Thank you.
And I'm Mike Rowe, Director for Marine and Fisheries at DEFRA, where I'm responsible for domestic and international marine and fisheries policy.
Thank you very much. We'll start with you, if I may, Minister Hardy. Our questions will all be to the ministers. If you want to bring in assistance, we'll leave that to you to decide. The government recently decided to designate new marine protected areas that extend current ones while designating others. Why?
This is all about our plans to deliver on the government's mission for clean power. So as you know, one of the most important missions the government has is to deliver on clean power. And one of the things we wanted to look at in terms of marine designation or MPA designation is also, are they in the right place and are they fit for the future? Because we know our climate is changing. We know some of the reasons some of those marine spaces were designated were for mobile species that move around. So we want to make sure they're in the right place for the future. And we're going to make sure also when we're looking at where our MPAs are designated that they're in the right place in terms of marine spatial prioritisation to make sure that they're the right place for what we want to do with our wider sea network.
So presumably when they were originally designated, they were in the right place and they didn't move. So did they cease to be in the right place, or did we just discover we could slap a wind turbine on it?
So I think part of it, so there's different types of marine protected areas. So some are protecting migratory species, seals, harbour porpoise and various other reasons. Some are protecting seabirds, some are protecting habitats and species, and then obviously you have your HMPA. So different marine MPAs are there for different reasons. So yes, some of it is about making sure they are in the right place, protecting the right things and that they're fit for the future. But some of this also comes in wider into marine spatial prioritisation and how are we using our seas. We've got an awful lot of pressure on the seas around our country. We've got pressure from fisheries, we've got pressure from what we want to do in clean power, we've got pressures for conservation, but there's also defence, there's telecommunications, there's much more, all of these different competing pressures. One of the things we're looking at is developing a strategic plan for marine spatial prioritisation, and part of that strategic plan means actually looking at all of our MPA network that we have right now and asking the question of thinking about the future and everything we want to do that involves the sea. Are these in the right place? And are they doing and protecting what we'd want them to do? And that's what the review is all about. And of course, we very much welcome contribution from the committee into that review and thoughts that you might have.
I'm sure you'll get them. In terms of that strategic work, had that not been done when they were initially identified then?
I think in terms of the marine spatial prioritisation, not really, because we've got a huge ambition in what we want to deliver on clean energy. This means we are going to be ramping up what we're doing in terms of offshore wind. And it's not before, under the previous government did they have that strategic look at actually how are we using our seas, where are we putting things, why are we making the decision to put them there, where else could we have it, what are the other competing priorities. So part of the work on Emma's pre-marine spatial prioritisation is looking at bringing together ministers who all have a different interest in the sea. I mean, including even sort of MHCLG, and they've got an interest in the sea. Lots of different people have an interest, and it's about saying, are we putting the right things in the right place? Now, it's obviously my role to think about marine protection, marine conservation, but it would be Minister Zeichn's role to be talking about fishing. Are things in the right place for the fishing community? And other ministers for defence, are things in the right place for what we want to do in terms of defence and energy delivery? And that's about having that strategic plan, which I have to say under the previous government didn't exist.
Yeah. So you've got this strategic plan, but you've already de-designated some areas, have you? What assessment was made of the quality of the marine protected areas that were being sort of delisted?
We haven't de-designated any MPAs at the moment. That's not happened. So we're doing a review to, as I say, make sure they're in the right place for the right feature that they want to protect. And there are different, as I've mentioned, different types of marine protected areas. So some of them, as I say, protecting seabirds, some protecting mobile species, some protecting the seabed. So there's different reasons for the different MPAs. So this isn't about de-designating ones we have. It's about having that strategic think about, are they in the right place for what we want to do in the future? Because what we wouldn't want to be in the situation where, and this won't happen under this government, but we won't want to be in a situation where we're designating marine protected areas only to find in 10 years' time, actually that's where we want to put a wind turbine, or actually that's where the MOD want to use that particular area. So this is about mapping it all out, saying what's our plans for different parts of the seabed, having that conversation now, which gives some level of security to offshore wind investors, that they know that these are the areas that we're looking at. So it gives them more certainty. It gives people interested in the marine environment and environmental issues some more certainty, and that these are places that we know are going to be future-proof. And it gives certainty to everyone else that has an interest, which has never existed previously.
We've heard in previous evidence sessions that the UK government's performing very well in identifying marine protected areas ahead of the 30 by 30 target. But when it comes to those marine protected areas actually being protected, the majority aren't. So from your perspective, shouldn't it be the policy to actually make sure that we better protect those areas we identify rather than continually sort of finding new ones when we haven't actually protected those that have already been identified?
I think you're absolutely right to point out that more needs to be done in terms of protecting MPAs. I think that's, I completely and utterly agree with you. So we are taking more action on this, and I'm not sure if the MMO mentioned some of the enforcement action that's going on at the moment, that we've issued 28 sort of notices, 5 investigations that we've done, also looking at the use of technology to improve investigation of what's happening in some of our MPA areas. And as I say, they are designated for different reasons. So in terms of the level of protection, MPAs is based on a feature by feature, because one of the questions that I expect I'll get is, why aren't you banning bottom trawling in an area that's protecting seabirds? So obviously if it's an MPA that's been designated for seabirds, that wouldn't be an area where we'd be looking at bottom trawling, because that wouldn't be the reason for the protection in that particular MPA. So there's different types that are therefore have different levels of protection depending on what species it is within that we want to protect. But we're also doing some more work now and looking at our HMPAs, and one of the things we're looking at is a consultation on removing exemptions for some of the activities that are going on there, and relating to anchoring as well. But that's obviously with HMPAs.
I mean, in terms of this review that is going on, you're saying we haven't delisted anywhere, but effectively everywhere is open to being considered as presumably as part of this review. But some people who really welcomed the fact that the UK government had identified so many marine protected areas might now be looking at it and saying, we thought we had that in the bank, we had these areas identified. What we're now being told, well, everything's up for review, that effectively this is something that can be sacrificed at the altar of the growth mission. Is that a reasonable criticism, or do you see why people will be nervous that that's what will happen?
Well, I really hope, if nothing else, from me coming here today, that I can offer some reassurance and calm any nerves that people might have on this. This government is utterly committed to 30 by 30. We're utterly committed to enforcing responsibilities under the Environment Act. This is not a regressive government. We are not looking to go backwards in terms of conservation. We want to go forwards. And I actually think, and I actually hope people will see this as a really positive thing. This is about future-proofing our marine protected areas. This is about making sure we have them in the right place, that they're protecting the right things. And we want to be involving various environmental groups in that consultation, obviously hearing from the committee as well, to make sure we set this up for the future. Because as I said,
I don't want to be in a situation where in a few years' time it's changing again. And I'd much rather now bring together ministers, bring together everyone who has different thoughts on this and plan this out properly, have a strategic plan for what we want to do. But as I say, we are committed to 30 by 30. We're committed to the Environment Act. We are not being regressive. We are making sure that we have things in the right place to fulfil all the commitments that the government's making.
Thank you. Wilson Griffiths.
Thank you, Chair, and very warm words, Emma Hardy. But what are you doing specifically to monitor the effectiveness of the currently designated MPAs in protecting marine environments?
Yeah, thanks so much for your question. So as I've mentioned, one of the things that the MMO is looking at is licensing. One of the other things we're looking at, which I think is quite exciting actually, is looking at different technology, looking at drones, looking at how we can investigate and protect what we already have. Obviously, there's been consultations done on future bylaws and some of the work that we want to do around that. But there is, as we all know, when you're talking about bylaws, when you're talking about changing the rules that happens in the MPAs, there's differences of opinions. And I meet with the environmental groups and they'll push me in one direction. You talk to some of the fishing community and they obviously want a different outcome. And it's always going to be, having a balance and having that conversation right across DEFRA, which is something we're really keen to do. But if your question is, have you done everything there is, then obviously we need to do more. I'm really keen to do more.
The question was more about what are the measures you have in place currently to monitor the effectiveness of the MPAs. So, it's great to hear about what's going to happen in the future, but what are you doing at the moment?
So as I mentioned, different MPAs are designated on a feature-by-feature basis. So it really, in terms of the action being taken, depends on the feature in which they're protecting. And if it's an MPA that's designated for protecting seabirds, then in terms of enforcement, that will be different if it's protecting the seabed. So it really will depend on the type of feature that's under protection on that MPA.
Okay, thank you. I wanted to talk about some MPAs that are further afield. With the government planning to hand over sovereignty of the Chagos Islands, can we have some details about the future of the marine protected area there?
With respect on Chagos, I will defer to the Minister from FCDO.
No, it's a really good question. And as I'm sure everyone's gathered, we're hopefully towards concluding negotiations with the Government of Mauritius on the future of the Chagos Archipelago. There has been an agreement that the Mauritian government will now lead on establishing a new marine protected area around the islands. That will be for them to do. We won't be telling them exactly what that has to consist of, and they will have to lead on that. But we have an agreement with them that they will do that because it's something that we've been pleased to do. And there are other reasons, obviously, than marine life that Emma's an expert on, for wanting to protect the seas around that archipelago, to do with, obviously, security, which is also a concern as part of the deal.
So I can ask you, at the point of the transfer of sovereignty, what will happen to the current MPA? Because I understand that we haven't had anything confirmed yet, but why won't the current MPA be continued and those protections guaranteed until something different is put in place?
Well, it can, and I'm not saying that it won't. All I'm saying is that when we transfer sovereignty, obviously the sovereignty will not belong to the United Kingdom any longer, and it will belong to the government of Mauritius, and they will make decisions about how they protect the seas around the Chagos Archipelago. And that is what we've agreed with them, but they have agreed that they will do that precisely, which I think you want more detail than we have, precisely what that will be, how they will do it, whether they will be looking, as Emma said, at different features or how holistic this will be. I don't know, but that is something that, when you give away sovereignty, there are certain things that go alongside that, and the marine protected area is something that we and the government of Mauritius want to see continue, but the precise nature of it, I don't know precisely what that will be.
I know ministers have said that they'll help Mauritius with capacity to set up an MPA and that funding will be provided to Mauritius. So how much funding will be provided and will it come from ODA budgets?
Well, as someone who's about to cut the ODA budget by about 40% over the next year and a half, we're working through exactly what the ODA will pay for. But I think what's important to realise is that this is a process that we're working alongside Mauritius on, and it's something that they care about and they want to see continue, as do we. So we could provide money, but we can also provide technical assistance, we can provide expertise, we can provide technology. So there are different ways that we can make sure that we do work together with Mauritius to make sure the marine area is protected in the future.
Have you set up what the governance arrangements will look like, and how the MPA will be governed in the area around Diego Garcia? And will any of those waters be covered by the lease?
No, we haven't set up the governance arrangements. As far as I'm aware, Helen, have we? No, we haven't done that yet.
And so could I ask that you refer back to the committee when you have done so?
I'd be very happy to update the committee on that.
Thank you. Barry Gardner.
Thank you, Chair. Minister Harty, can I start by picking up what you said about seabirds? We have, 377 MPAs in the UK, about 200 in England alone. Do you know how many of them are protected for seabirds?
Like coming on that, so
5, isn't it? 5.
I'm more than happy to get you the figure. Mike, would you like to?
5.
So we have 181 MPAs in English waters that the Minister is responsible for.
Yep.
Around about 100 of those MPAs currently have fishing restrictions in place.
Yes, 5 of them are actually protected. The feature that is being protected is seabirds. Is that not correct?
I don't have that detail before me.
Perhaps you could write to the committee about that. But I wanted to pick up on the feature base because, you see, you said about making sure that the MPAs were in the right place. Mm-hmm. The very fact that they have been done on a feature basis, surely that ensures that they are in the right place. Because actually what you're designating is the protection of the feature that's there. And apart from those 5, all of them have been designated for demersal features. So I don't understand why there's now a question mark over whether they're in the right place. Okay. We know they're in the right place because we were doing it because of the features that were there.
Absolutely. So they were designated on the basis of the feature that was currently there. And some of those are for marine birds. And as Mike has kindly said, he'll let you know exactly how many are. But some are designated for special areas of conservation. Those are the ones that came from the EU. So they were EU-derived MPAs.
Under Natura 2000.
Yeah, and they, I think, were you DEFRA Minister at the time, Barry? Well, must have been around that time. So some obviously protected migratory fish, seals, harbour porpoise, so some protected migratory species. I think it is important, recognising climate is changing, that we have a look at where some of these species are and we check that the designation for them is in the right place. What I want to really reassure you on, and as I say, I hope if nothing else I managed to achieve this. This isn't about being regressive. This isn't about reducing the number of MPAs. This isn't about making them smaller. This is just about making sure they're in the right place for now and future-proofing them. That's what the purpose of the review is for. Not to remove any, not to not to get rid of any, not to be regressive, but to say, okay, this MPA was created to protect certain migratory fish. Is that in the right place still? Is that still where we'd want it to be?
But we have had talk at the committee of changing the designation so that we could put, for example, windmills. Look, I'm all in favour of our renewables targets, okay?
Yes.
But I just want to get clarity on this. And I think what we heard was that actually there might be alternate MPAs providing that. But of course, the MPAs that we've established were the MPAs that were most important for those features, and therefore get that elsewhere is going to be very difficult.
I think we probably ought to suspend the sitting for the division rather than sort of people miss the vote or get half an answer to the question. So I think we'll see the votes and this sitting is suspended. Order. Order. Well, my colleague Barry Garden was cut off in his prime, unfortunately, and it is possible we will be interrupted again, so apologies to anyone watching our proceedings. But if I can ask you to just repeat the question, Barry, and then we'll go to the Minister for the answer.
That's if I can remember. I've got so many. When we're considering features-based MPAs, it seems to me that when you talk about the seabirds, for example, that's the feature it was designated on. Seabirds are mobile. But the seabirds are in that spot for a particular reason, usually because it's feeding grounds, isn't it? And therefore there would be something about that spot which actually means that you've got the seabirds there, which is under the water, and if you allow a trawler to come on right through it, you're probably going to take out what's under the water and make sure that your feature is no longer a feature. So it seems to me that one can't simply use an example like that that says, oh, well, they're up in the air, and therefore it's not relevant. That you've designated that particular area. Let me ask you another question, because we were getting on to the issue of the placing of wind turbines and the potential to then say, well, we're no longer going to designate this area, but we will put in compensatory measures elsewhere. The problem with that, Minister, as far as I can see, is that because we took quite a while to get up to 181 MPAs, what we tried to do was to designate the most important ones first, the ones that were most obvious in need of protection. And it was part of a coherent ecological strategy. That was what it was. Natura 2000 was designated as a coherent ecological strategy. Therefore, to sort of think that you can now mix and match with that, you're not only going to lose the coherence, but also you're not going to be able to get adequate compensation.
Okay, so I think on marine spatial planning, as in what are we trying to put where, I hope I've tried to explain the need for a strategic plan on what's going where in our ocean. So as we've said, at the moment, in terms of where we put offshore wind, where MOD is, where cables are, where we dig for aggregates, all of these things have just evolved over time without ever being really planned for strategically. So I think the marine spatial prioritisation is really important. Obviously, I'm sitting here today talking about marine biodiversity and conservation. If Minister Zeichner was here, he'd be talking about the importance of marine spatial planning for fishing and making sure that fishing is in the right place. So there are all, as you can see, there are different priorities, which is why I think we need to bring people together and come up with a kind of plan for where everything is. And in that plan, what we're looking at is literally mapping out the sea and determining where things should be and what's the right place for it, and having those cross-government and sometimes in DEFRA, when you have fishing and marine protection, internal conversations
Absolutely.
About where is the best place.
Before DESNES published its consultation Building the North Sea Energy Future last month, what input did you have?
So we work really, I work really closely with Minister Shank. So we're both sort of, obviously, it's the government's mission is green energy power. Obviously, to deliver on that green energy power, he needs offshore wind, and that means he needs to put them in the seas and the oceans, which comes under my responsibility. So we work very closely together. We have regular meetings. But just to be really clear, the marine spatial prioritisation work is wider than just me and DEFRA and DESNES.
No, but I'm asking you specifically about this consultation document. And the reason I'm asking you about that is because whilst it focuses on environmental considerations in terms of oil and gas, it doesn't recognise the challenges of marine spatial planning or the environmental impact of renewable energy developments and the wider environmental implications. That's why I'm asking, what specific input did you have into that document? Because it's very narrow in its environmental scope.
The conversations I tend to have with Minister Shanks are more about how can we ensure the best use of our seas. As I say, I'm here talking about the environment. Daniel would be here talking about...
You didn't have any input into that consultation document?
If it helps, Mr Gardner, so what we're trying to do in terms of mitigating the environmental impacts of offshore wind is using powers that were first created in the Energy Act 2023, and we're going through the process. For example, earlier this week we launched a consultation on our Marine Recovery Fund, and it was also as part of the written ministerial statement in January, we put out that statement saying that we're going to look to expand our MPA areas to compensate for benthic damage, because offshore wind developers have been struggling to compensate for that under the hierarchy of compensation required under the regulations. So I think that the document that you referred to that DESNE's published recently is a sort of earlier stage statement of policy, whereas what we're doing at the moment on offshore wind is delivering and implementing under the Energy Act powers specific measures to improve our strategic approaches to compensation, to set up the Marine Recovery Fund, and as part of that we've committed to that wider review of the MPA network to make sure that in light of biodiversity pressure, climate change pressure, spatial squeeze in the sea, that we're protecting the right things in the best way for biodiversity and for climate.
I think that's reassurance that ultimately this will come out well. I wanted to ask you about, you talked about a features-based approach to MPAs, but of course there's a whole site approach which has really shown itself to be more effective for marine conservation protection than the feature-based approach. And we see that in the Lyme Bay example, where it's one of the largest MPAs that we have in the UK, and I just wonder what thinking there is in the department about moving from features-based to a whole site approach.
I think so. If it's an MPA, then obviously it's based on features. If it's based on the whole site approach, then that would come under what we would call the highly marine protected areas there instead. So there are 3 HMPAs at the moment which are banning obviously pretty much everything that takes place within that area. That's one of the things we're looking at. I mentioned about the anchoring laws and the consultation to make sure they are fully protected. So at the moment, as I say, under the MPA legislation, it is based on features. If it's a whole site, then that would be, we classify that as a highly marine protected area, HMPA.
I think I need to move on, if I may. Anna Gelderd, please.
Thanks. Thank you, Chair. Baroness Chapman, if I come to you now, what steps is the government taking to strengthen marine protection in the UK overseas territories? We've heard previously some comments on that issue, but how does this align with the broader UK marine conservation goals?
I mean, our overseas territories are where we find, I think it's correct to say, the majority of the marine biodiversity that we are responsible for in some way. So we have the Blue Belt Initiative with our OTs, which we provide funding for, and that seems to be working relatively well. I think it's vital, though, that we keep monitoring that and we keep close to our OTs on how we make sure that they are enforced, because well, it's not enforcement, but that initiative is very important, and I think because of where our OTs are, and sometimes they are sovereign governments and we need to work alongside them, but I think the conversations that we have with them on very many issues, the ecology and the impact of climate change and all of those issues that matter a great deal to those countries, and they're things that they want to talk about, and they recognise that those sorts of initiatives that protect their waters are actually incredibly valuable to them, and they want to work closely with us on that.
So how is the government protecting the future of those hugely successful programmes like the Blue Belt programme and the Darwin and the Darwin Plus funding in light of ODA cuts? What do you envision to be the future for those programmes?
Well, I think it's important that one of the things you all know about the ODA decision that was made, and it does mean that everything needs to be looked at, and we need to make sure that we prioritise our spend. We need to make sure that we get value for money for every pound that we spend. So there's a prioritisation task to do, but there's also an efficiency task to do. So making sure that even when we say we want to protect something like the Blue Belt initiative, that the money that we're putting into that, it's actually going where we want it to go, and we're getting the impact that we want to have. So that's something that we're looking at the moment. Obviously, we've got to make some very quick decisions on our ODA programming, which we're in the process of doing. But over the next sort of 6 to 12 months, we'll need to make some further decisions, which would mean that we'd need to look at those programs. But I mean, without wanting to be a hostage to fortune here, I really can't imagine a situation where climate and biodiversity isn't something that we want to continue to prioritise as part of that spending.
That's very good to hear. Are you planning to continue the ring fencing of the $3 billion for nature within the international climate financing and ODA spending?
We have a
process going forward.
Well, I mean, I get asked about ring fencing for lots of things every day, and I really don't like it. I think what we need to do, rather than sort of ring fencing X percentage for this or X money for that, I think we really need to look again at what we're getting for what we spend, and where things are delivering and they're having an impact, and they're in line with the government's priorities, one of which is, of course, climate. And I hope you noticed the Foreign Secretary's speech at Kew earlier this year, and how he wants to put nature at the heart of what we do. Where things are working and where we can identify the funding, and ideally where we can work with partners and other governments to make sure that we're doing things in a coordinated way, then those are the things that we know that I hope that we'll be able to continue to support. But it's tough, you don't take 40% of your budget away that quickly, and not, when we say tough choices, we mean it. It's tough choices.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. John Whitby.
Thank you very much. How are you ensuring that environmental obligations from international treaties or targets such as 30 by 30 are on course to being delivered? I'm happy with whoever answers.
Thanks so much. So one of the things I was genuinely really delighted about is after we won the election, Prime Minister Starmer recommitted the UK government to the high-level panel on sustainable oceans, and he nominated me as Sherpa for that panel. And this panel, so I've met some of the co-chairs of that. So this is 15 different countries working together, and basically, because international governance is so complex, and there's so many various treaties and obligations when it comes to the oceans, the idea behind the high-level panel on sustainable oceans is we bring all of that information together, and that we create a plan by 2027 which is cross-cutting on what do we want to achieve as an individual country. So it's looking at all of our international obligations, bringing it and saying, right, this is what we want to do, this is our plan by 2027. So I'm delighted that we've recommitted to that, and work is going on right now into pulling that plan together and making sure that it's effective for the future.
Okay, and just going back to the overseas territories, in terms of marine protection, which overseas territory is of the highest concern to the government, and what is being done to make it less concerning?
Overseas territories that we're responsible for.
I don't know, Jenny's one.
Jenny?
I don't know which one would be. I mean, they're all concerning for different reasons, aren't they? And I'm concerned about Turks and Caicos because of security and the impact of Haiti. I'm concerned about them all. And Minister Doughty, who is responsible for our overseas territories, he spends a lot of time discussing our various concerns with them. Obviously, we have the Falkland Islands as well, but I think I would say that they all have something unique in terms of their biodiversity and their marine life, and we haven't done a sort of ranking of this one we're going to look after and that one we're not. I don't know if I've never heard that discussed.
All right. Well, Thank
you.
If I may, just to come back, I think one of the things I think that's we should be incredibly proud of as a country is we are really highly regarded when it comes to the work that we do on oceans, and we have a genuinely huge global influence right across. And just to give a bit of a shout out to the DEFRA team and what it does when it goes abroad and it does these negotiations and works for us, I think it's something that we should all be incredibly proud of, that we are respected as a country that is delivering when it comes to the oceans.
Thank you. Chris Hinchliffe.
Thank you, Chair. Minister Hardy, if I can start by paraphrasing some written evidence we received from Oceana. Marine planning systems in the UK, particularly in England, offer little strategic direction to avoid and balance competing interests in marine space. And given that the 2011 Marine Policy Statement that guides all marine plans in the UK still contains policies such as seeking to maximise oil and gas production, do you think that policy statement is still relevant and suitable for addressing the current challenges and priorities of the marine environment?
Thanks so much. And SA Oceana are a fantastic organisation and one of the many ENGOs that I meet and talk to, and there's lots of hugely committed ENGOs in this area. But this goes back to the point I made before, in that we need to be thinking about marine spatial prioritisation, we need to be thinking about marine planning. Lots of things haven't been updated for a number of years under the previous government. We're getting ahead in terms of thinking strategically about how we use the seas and where's the best place for conservation, where's the best place for offshore wind, where are the best places for all the different priorities that this government has. And one of the reasons we all want to deliver clean energy and clean power is that we're not going to be reliant on fossil fuels, and we're going to have that just transition. So this is all in the round. If we want to deliver our clean energy mission, then we need to be looking at where we put offshore wind, and that means we need to be thinking about where they go and making sure that they're in the right place, and that we're still having the same level, if not better, of marine conservation that we've had in the past. Oh, sorry, Mike. Yeah.
Maybe just to add a couple of points in case it's helpful. So there's quite a lot of work in a range of organisations you've probably heard about in this space. So DESNES are in the process of preparing via the NESO, the Strategic Spatial Energy Plan, which they expect to deliver in 2026. You'll have probably heard from the Crown Estate about their marine route map. And the work that we've been undertaking in the department, which the Minister's been leading on marine spatial prioritisation, tries to holistically bring together all government interests. And whilst it's true that the Marine Policy Statement was published back in 2011, in 2023 the overarching Energy Policy Statement included an updated section on marine considerations, which also flagged that as part of that marine spatial prioritisation programme that the Minister mentioned, we'll be reviewing how the Marine Policy Statement and how marine plans are operating, do they need to be beefed up, and trying to make sure we plug into the work that Crown Estate are doing and that DESNES are doing on the Strategic Spatial Energy Plan.
Okay, thank you. Certainly holistic planning would be very welcome. I'm not sure I actually detected an answer to the question of whether you will be, whether you think the 2011 Marine Policy Statement is still relevant. So will you be updating that statement? And if so, when do you hope to do that by?
I think the statement has, I think part of that refers to energy policy, so I'm conscious as the DEFRA Minister that I'm not speaking about DESNES policy, because that would be inappropriate. But I hope what I have explained is what we're trying to do as a new government, which is looking at prioritisation and making sure we have things in the right place. And as I say, just to reiterate the point, we're not a regressive government. We're not seeking to be regressive in any way at all. We're committed to 30 by 30. That's a commitment that we're all making, and I'll repeat again today. But to deliver on what we want to do in terms of that just transition away from oil and gas, we need to build offshore wind. A lot of that offshore wind is going to be in our seas, and that brings back to the point of the competing priorities and how do we manage that in a strategic way.
I fear I may have slightly led us down an avenue, actually, because that was merely given as the point around oil and gas was merely given as an example of the ways it might be considered out of date. I'm just going to push one further time to see if I can get clarity on whether you are considering reviewing the Marine Policy Statement, and if so, when you might intend to do that by.
And I hate to be repeating myself as well. However, if it's related to energy policy, then it wouldn't be appropriate for me to speak about somebody else's brief.
Okay, fine. So to move slightly further on then, how do you feel scientific evidence is integrated into policy decisions to ensure that economic activities taking place in the marine environment do not compromise long-term sustainability and protection?
We've got some brilliant people working on science and working on innovation and looking at our marine environment. In fact, lots of that evidence is partly what's going to be guiding the work we do on marine spatial prioritisation. It's also been looking at our MPA review. We need that level of scientific evidence to make sure that we're putting things in the right place to see if the fish stocks have moved, where have they moved to. We need that level of evidence. We need that understanding. So it's a huge part of what we plan and what we do. And we have R&D work going into this all the time. But if you want to know anything more.
Yeah, maybe a couple of examples, if helpful. So we've talked about marine protected areas. So when we're looking at the bylaws and the programme of bylaws that we're bringing in, with MMO, with Natural England and with JNCC, they will look at what it is, what's the feature that we're trying to protect and what activity might damage it. So that scientific input into the process is baked in right from the start to make sure we take an evidence-based approach so that we are restricting activities that could potentially prevent an MPA from getting into favourable or recovering condition in line with our target. Equally on fisheries, for example, we have excellent scientists at our organisation CFAS who plug into international communities to make sure that when we're setting annual fisheries negotiations and catch limits, that fundamentally we're observing with the requirements of the Fisheries Act and basing all of those decisions on science. And ministers have to take into account other objectives as part of that, as I think the EFRA committee heard from our Minister Daniel Zeitner yesterday. So absolutely integrated. We've got scientists within the core department as well as scientists in a number of arm's length bodies.
Okay, thank you. The Courier Review published today raised concerns about the limited scope of publicly shared data, noting a reduction in particular in data collected and released by the Environment Agency. How could the data that helps to underpin scientific research and your decision-making be made more accessible to others in environmental groups, local communities and industry to enable them to help monitor the effectiveness of the measures that you are pursuing?
Yeah, and I think this is a really important point, because I think where there's a lack of transparency, people maybe misinterpret how decisions are made. So as my general rule of thumb is I'll try and be as transparent as possible unless there's a particular reason why I'm not able to share the data. So quite obviously, data and information about marine spatial prioritisation and the MOD might not be something that we would be sharing. However, very keen to share as much information so people can understand, because we are being evidence-based, how did we make that decision? What was the reasons behind that decision? And they might question the decision, but at least they can see from the evidence how that came about. And of course, if there's any particular evidence that you as a member of the committee or the committee would want to see or know more about, then I would like to share as much as I can, as I say, unless there's a particular reason why I'm unable to.
I'm sure your commitment to transparency is very welcome. Do you feel that the data is currently being made available in a sufficiently timely way to the wider community to enable their sort of monitoring of what government is doing?
I think the fact that it's come out in the Dan Courier Review means that this is obviously an area where it needs improvement. So it's something that we need to have a look at. It's highlighted as a potential problem, so we need to look at ways in which we can address it and resolve that. And that's something that we're working on now.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Alistair Carmichael.
Thank you very much, Chair. Minister Hardy, what has been the net impact on fishing opportunity as a consequence of the changes to MPE designations that you've been describing?
Changes that we're looking to prescribe. So goes back to the question on marine spatial prioritisation, and I'm actually really pleased you've mentioned it, because it highlights even within the committee that there are different tensions when it comes to managing the oceans. So in the marine spatial prioritisation, we have the fishing community represented, of course, by Daniel Zeitner, so he's part of those conversations. And as I highlighted, there is, when you're looking at spatial squeeze, when you're looking at where you can put things, that is going to be an impact. And my written ministerial statement did sort of acknowledge the fact that there is going to be an impact on fishing.
Can you quantify that impact?
At this moment, no, because we wouldn't know in terms of looking at the marine, where we're going to put MPAs in the future and where we've got to at the stage of marine spatial prioritisation. That would be that would be impossible to quantify that at this moment. But I'm still, even though I sit here as the marine conservationist, if you like, I still obviously talk to the... Of course. I still obviously talk to the fishing community as well. We still have those conversations to see how we can best manage it. But, there is a spatial squeeze. There's no getting around. That's a challenge, and that's why we need to think about it strategically.
Thank you. I regret that we have been interrupted again by a division, so I'm afraid I will have to suspend this sitting again. Or Order. So we were just hearing from my colleague Alistair Carmichael. Back to you, please.
So, Minister Hardy, when do you envisage bringing forward proposals for HMPAs?
So in terms of new proposals for HMPAs, in terms of, sorry, just so I understood, is that designating new HMP, designating new ones? Well, under the MPA review, we're looking at all of them, and HMPAs are included in that. But at the moment, in that review, we're not considering designating new HMPAs. It's sort of looking at whether things that we've got are in the right place. But also, really importantly, some of the HMPAs that we haven't really had all of the legislation passed required, or the rules passed required to truly make them into HMPAs. And those 3 that we've designated to begin with were designated as pilot projects, so we could learn from them, understand, look at the evidence. So I think in terms of what my priority is where we have the HMPAs, make sure that they have all of the rules required to truly make them HMPAs, then look at the learning from that in terms of pilot projects before I'd look at looking where else we could put HMPAs at the moment.
What do you anticipate will be the net effect on fishing opportunity once you make these designations?
So just to be really clear, so that under the MPA, when we're looking, going back to sort of spatial squeeze and all of the concerns around that, fishing community is fully represented in all of those conversations around spatial squeeze by the Fishing Minister, by Minister Zeichner.
He's a wonderful minister. But
he is a wonderful minister. He is a wonderful minister. And we also talk directly to the fishing community as well. But part of the difficulty at the moment is that because we're doing the marine spatial prioritisation, of course we don't know at the moment where the offshore winds are going to be, because that's part of why we're having the strategic plan. But some of the work to feed in, just to offer you some reassurance, and to offer the fishing community, I hope, some reassurance as well, we fed into the MMO around vessel monitoring data, into looking at various models. So we've got a clear picture of where are people actually fishing, because obviously to make an evidence-based decision about where you put somebody strategically, you need to know what's fishing is happening there and what's going on. So they've got rather fantastic models that ping back location information, so we can look at where these vessels are, we can look at where the most important areas are, and of course listening to the fishing community when they've come to us with their own information to say, conversations pretty much on the lines of, don't put anything there, that's a key catch ground. Okay, you could put it there. They're the kind of conversations that we're having, and then overlaying all this information to come up with our strategic plan for what we're doing with this oceans. But Mike and his team, and I'm conscious I'm not the fishing minister, but we do have the director for fishing with me, meets the fishing industry regularly. And is there anything else you want to add?
No, I think it happens at multiple levels. So we will meet as government with the fishing industry. The Crown Estate will also engage directly with the fishing industry, and when they're thinking about which parts of the seabed to lease, they will take into account the importance of those grounds. And even individual developers will also have discussions with the fishing industry to try and make sure that all of those decisions are conscious ones with based on evidence.
The state will tell you that their private maximise economic to the Treasury. So it's not necessarily about fishing, is it?
I think the Crown Estate would say that they have also really prioritised supporting sustainable development at sea and delivering for nature as well. And I think we've seen in recent years the level of engagement that the Crown Estate are undertaking with the fisheries industry. There's been a step change upwards in that.
I'm sure...
No, just to sort of mention one success story, because who doesn't like to share success? So with the marine spatial prioritisation, in the past I was informed that fishing community and sort of telecommunications, the cables that go along the bottom of the ground, there was regular conflict in terms of the types of fishing and how that disrupted the cables. And through the marine spatial prioritisation programme, we've actually been able to bring them together to come up with a solution so that works for the cabling, so they're not accidentally dragging up the cables in their fishing, but works for the fishing community as well. And what I don't want to give the impression, and apologies if I have, that this isn't just designating one area and saying that's the sole use of this, that's the sole use of that. There's actually opportunities for co-location. If we think quite carefully about how we do things, there are opportunities for co-location. And actually bringing people together and saying, okay, so you've got a cabling going down here, but actually if you fish just that side or that side of it, you're not going to interrupt the cable. Everyone's happy, because sometimes we can have everyone as a winner.
Well, indeed, we all know that. Look, I'm sure the Trawlermen of Cambridge will be well represented by Minister Zeichner, but what actions do you think you should be taking from the experience of the SNP Green Coalition in Holyrood and their efforts to introduce EMAs?
Obviously, it's devolved, so I was completely respect the
You'll be aware of how it worked.
I am aware of how it went, but I just want to say for the record, I respect it's a devolved decision, it's a devolved government. But of course, you're sort of looking at where you're putting things in, and from my understanding of that situation, and I respect you're closer to it than I am, one of the really important things is talking to the local community and engaging thoroughly with the local community. So when we're making decisions around marine prioritisation and where we're going to put things, we do need to recognise that we have those conversations and have community support.
And making sure that while everybody surely at the end of the day nobody will get everything they want, but everybody has to feel they've had a fair crack at it.
100%.
Good luck with that.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to bring in Blake Stevenson now. If you could do the question to Baroness Chapman first, and then we'll work from there. So Blake Stevenson.
Thank you, Chair. Baroness Chapman, what are the timelines to ratify the High Seas Treaty, and what stage is the government at?
So we are completely committed to it. We will ratify when we've got our legal ducks in a row. I need to get some space in the parliamentary time to be able to do that. You'll understand we're a new government and it's a bit of a crowded field at the moment, but we are committed to it and we will do it.
Do you have a timeline in mind? None whatsoever?
I would love a timeline. I would love the Chief Whip to tell me and the Leader of the House to tell me this is when we're going to do this, but we're not in that place at the moment. But
you're not going to be ambitious enough to commit to June?
Me?
Yes.
That would be very stupid. No, but what I wouldn't want is to give the impression that because we don't have a fixed point in the parliamentary calendar, that in any way diminishes our commitment, because it doesn't. And I talk about BB&J with partners across the world all the time, just to reiterate our commitment, so it is solid.
Yeah. No, I understand that. You talked about getting sort of legal ducks in a row, which makes perfect sense. Are there particular issues in implementing the legislation, or is it purely a timetabling matter?
No, I don't think there are any legal issues. It is about timetabling. I mean, inevitably when you present something to Parliament, something may come up, and because we respect the work of both houses, we would be open to issues being raised, but I'm not anticipating any issues like that, no.
And in terms of the resourcing that's been allocated to get this over the line, just to clarify, it's also not a resourcing issue, it's purely a timetabling issue?
No, it's not a resourcing issue. No. Okay.
Can I just come in on the back of that, just to show our commitment to this? So even though it hasn't been ratified yet by Parliament, and we know that, DEFRA's already commissioned research to have a look at potential area-based management tools for the future, including marine protected areas. So we're already looking at getting ahead of, okay, so when it's ratified, we're ready to go straight away. So we're doing the research now, even though the ratification hasn't gone through Parliament, so that we can hit the ground running, because we are really committed to BB&J.
Yeah. So I think your commitment is clear. You've said you're committed quite a few times there. So far, 21 countries have ratified the treaty. But very, very quickly, I'll make this the last question. Is it embarrassing that we have not got this over the line when you're in front of all of these countries?
Excuse me for getting my handbag. I have to go back. No, it's not embarrassing. I mean, people understand, and we have similar conversations with other countries on things that we want them to hurry up and do around sort of CPTPP and things like that. So it's not unusual. Other states understand. Everybody has their own parliamentary obligations and pressures on their systems. So when we speak sort of minister to minister or official to official, it's well understood, and it's not like as if we're the last state either. So I think people understand where we're coming from, and they agree that we are committed, and they're glad that we are.
I think Baroness Chapman needs to...
Baroness Chapman, thanks very much. We'd love you to come back if you possibly can.
Okay,
We've got more for you. But I will now go to Sarah Gibson, who's got a question for Minister Hardy.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Hardy. We just wondered if you would be able to update the committee on what measures are being taken to monitor the environmental impacts of the recent collision in the North Sea, and what action is being taken to prevent damage to the marine and coastal environment. And I note that my question, if Baroness Chapman is able to come back, is to do with plastics, and I notice there's been quite a lot of plastic deposits from that collision as well.
Yes, and I should probably just mention for the record that, of course, this is very near my constituency as well. So just to note that there's also a constituency issue here. I have to say, I think the MCA did a great job. They've immediately begun retrieval. That's happening at beaches. Encourage the public not to go and retrieve some of it themselves, because we're sort of looking at all of it. So they've got surface skimmers which can operate in shallow water, towing a net behind it to recover some of the individual nurdles. We've also got skimmers and booms to collect some nurdles on the surface of the water as well. And we've asked, as I say, the public to call the local authority rather than pick it up themselves in order to currently accurately assess the levels of the pollution. So we've had aerial flyovers having a look at sort of what are the levels of pollution at the moment, and the good news is they're not currently observing further nurdles in the water at this moment, and it's part of a national contingency plan for responding to marine pollution which has been enacted. So the immediate response to this awful incident is of course led by DFT, but DEFRA comes in when it comes to looking at the environmental side of it. We're really pleased that it hasn't had as great of environmental impact as it could have done, and I think that's something to be welcomed. I mean, one of my other portfolios is air pollution, and that was something where there was a great amount of local anxiety about, which was really delighted it didn't show increased levels of air pollution, but we still have nurdles at sea, Chair.
Thank you. Chris Hinchliffe.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to follow up, Minister, if I may, very briefly on the discussion we were having before the previous division around the 2011 Marine Policy Statement. I just want to clarify, through the expertise of the committee clerks, the Marine Policy Statement does sit with DEFRA, not DESNES. So in terms of my question as to whether you are considering updating that policy statement, and if so, when you might look to do that, don't think we need to reopen, for the sake of the timings that we've got here today, that question now, but I'd be very grateful if you could write to the committee about that to confirm those 2 points.
Happy to.
Okay, Barry Gardner.
Yeah. Minister, we heard that you're at the point of trying to get BBNJ and the Oceans Treaty ratified. That's great news. You talked about the work that's being done that will mean that you can get on with it very quickly. But we heard from the witness earlier today from the MMO that they've completed their work on stage 3, and that is now on, if I quote, ministers' desks. So what's now holding stage 3 up?
Okay, so I've not conflated the two things. On BB&J, of course, we've got the research going. So
I was trying to lead in gently.
You do me a linking.
You for the good things that you are trying to do ahead of time.
Right.
Whilst pointing out that actually some good things have already been done that you haven't yet implemented.
Okay.
And you did undertake to do so by the end of last year. And of course, good ecological status was promised by 2020, and we still don't have it. And we could go on. But the state of our seas is perilous. Actually, what the chair of the Environmental Select Committee said, and what you said about the great science that we have, fishing quotas, tax were set in 50% of the cases above what the science had said. So I'm trying to dig down into that and say, why can't we get on with stage 3? Because the MMO says it's already there on your desk.
So totally understand. And I think to give the overarching response is, I want to get this right. I want to make sure that we've got this right. So stage 3 bylaws cover 43 MPAs, that's 13% of English waters, almost 3 times the previous stage, 3 times the size of the previous stage when we were looking at the bylaws yet, and almost half of UK fishing fleet catches through bottom trawling would be, there's going to be an impact. So it's of a huge scale, it's much greater than it was last time. I want to make sure that I get this right. I think it's important that we work through the process. As a new minister, it's important that I understand it all and I'm talked through the consequences, because one of the dangers for any minister is not understanding the unintended consequences when you make a decision, and you'll know yourself from your time in DEFRA there are competing priorities. So I want to understand it properly, I want to get it right, and that means it's just taking a little bit longer than perhaps it would have done. But I think I'd rather take a little bit longer and be making good policy decisions than rushing something through that I don't fully understand the consequences of.
Okay, thank you. Blake Stevenson.
Minister, we've heard concerns throughout this inquiry that in practice coordination between departments across government in governing the marine environment is not working effectively. A piece of written evidence this committee received from Renewable UK says that the offshore wind industry is concerned about the lack of joined-up work across government, leading to siloed thinking, and Professor Melanie Austin told the committee there is a bit of a mismatch of who's doing what and where. How do you respond to these concerns, and what steps will you take to improve cross-departmental collaboration?
Absolutely. So, as you know, the clean energy power is a huge mission of the government, important priority. So I've been talking to some of the offshore wind industry about what's holding up consent, what's holding up planning, why is it they've not been able to get on with projects as quickly as they could under the previous government. And it does come back to marine spatial prioritisation, looking at where we put things, and so that they know, if they know, for example, a particular area of the sea that we've almost allocated to offshore wind, that helps them with the planning process. But one of the other really important things we're doing is around the Marine Recovery Fund, which is kind of similar to what's happening on land at the moment. So at the moment, you have to go through all of the compensatory measures that you have to do if you're building offshore wind to compensate against damage. We're looking to create, and it was in the ministerial, my written statement that came out in this January, looking at creating a Marine Recovery Fund. And I think this actually could be really exciting, genuinely really exciting, because at the moment you compensate on a very strict basis, and this is where you see those artificial nesting sites appearing around the country. With the Marine Recovery Fund, that would be a fund that different developers could pay in, and you could do something really quite special, because there's quite a lot of money coming in from offshore wind to really do something impressive on the environment. And what I'd love to do is I'd love to maybe write to the committee or tell the committee more about this so I can hear your thoughts, but also all the environmental groups as well, to say, okay, we want to consult on this Marine Recovery Fund. We're going to potentially have, quite a lot of money coming into it from all the offshore wind that's going to happen. Let's do something brilliant. Let's do something special when it comes to marine conservation, and let's use this money to do it.
In addition to the Marine Recovery Fund, and I think it would be good to write to the committee and describe that from your perspective and how great that is, but how does your department coordinate with the Crown Estate and Marine Management Organisation to ensure effective marine planning?
Yes, so this is the marine spatial prioritisation. So we meet with the Crown Estate. So the Crown Estate, of course, responsible for leasing of the seabed and determining what goes where. We're having those conversations with different ministers from different departments, along with the Crown Estate, to look at what are we putting where. So we have regular conversations with the Crown Estate about this. Because if we're saying to offshore wind, and they want this as well, they want some certainty as well, that if we're saying, okay, you're going to go ahead with leasing this particular area, what they don't want to find out in a few years' time is when they've got so far down the consenting process that actually, no, we want to allocate that as a marine protected area. They want to know that from the beginning, which is why planning and having that strategic plan from the beginning matters so much. And it's been really, the Marine Recovery Fund's been really welcomed, hasn't it, by industry. They were really pleased about it.
Yeah. Maybe just one technical detail. So I mentioned earlier how DEFRA has initiated some work on our marine spatial prioritisation programme across government, how the Crown Estate are doing work on their marine route map and how DESNES are doing work on the Strategic Spatial Energy Plan. The data that the Minister mentioned that we get from MMO in terms of vessel monitoring to build that fishing picture, that data we've got also on where our MPAs are and the condition of those has been fed into both the Crown Estate's work and into the DESNES work on the strategic plan, so that ideally everyone's working off the same data set, even if Crown Estate and DESNES will be looking from a slightly different angle, whereas the Minister is responsible for all interest in the marine environment.
You mentioned the Marine Delivery Roadmap, which leads me on to, I think, my final question. Will the government consider adopting it as a strategic tool for marine planning?
As I say, our priority is to go through looking at MSP, looking at marine spatial prioritisation, and then obviously announcing my written statement around the Marine Recovery Fund that we want to help unlock growth. And it's a priority for government, and it's one of the 5 priorities for government, so clearly it's a priority for this department. And it comes back to, I suppose, my general feeling about most things I'm asked is, how do we do this the best way? How can I do this well? And to me, delivering on our clean energy mission and delivering on protecting the environment and respecting the needs of the fishing community, I think the way that we're looking at it with this strategic approach is the best way to do it, bearing in mind we might not please everyone all the time, but hopefully we'll please some of the people some of the time.
I think that's a good point to end on.
Just to clarify on that, I mean, we obviously had heard the evidence that Mr Stevenson referred to. You've spoken effusively about your working together. I mean, do you not recognise that criticism that organisations like Renewables UK make of the government? Do you think they're wrong?
I think they're right to make those criticisms in the past, absolutely. And what I'd hope they would say is that they can see that we're trying to take a different approach. That has been the case, and it's been the case for a long time. There hasn't been a strategic plan. And I hope they'd recognise we've come in as a new government and we're trying to do things differently. We've not been able to change everything immediately, but I hope they'll see that we're moving to more strategic planning and that we are taking their concerns seriously and we are really committed to the green energy mission.
Yeah, I mean, in fairness, those representations we heard were under this government. They were part of this review. I mean, whether they now think things have changed, we'll maybe ask them. But Sarah Gibson, come to you if I can.
Thank you. Thank you very much for returning, Baroness Chapman, because I have one last quick question for you, which is whether you would be able to provide us with an update on the Global Plastics Treaty.
I think Emma knows more about this than me. I have met with the government of Ecuador and discussed this, and I've met with the ambassador for Ecuador, and I saw him in the palace last night briefly as well. They've done an amazing job on this. It's fantastic, the amount of support they're able to galvanise internationally, and I think it's great to see. They have responsibility for Galapagos, but they are becoming leaders in this, which I think is really encouraging from my point of view, from a sort of geopolitical perspective. But I think, Emma, you know more about... They've met... The ambassador meets with Emma too, so I think she might be best placed.
I love this. This is really exciting. So we're, as a UK, part of the High Ambition Coalition. Obviously, we didn't, internationally, weren't able to negotiate the final treaty. So there's negotiations going to be happening again this year, but that wasn't for the lack of UK passion, involvement and commitment. And the DEFRA team, to use a maybe non-ministerial word, smashed it out there. They were absolutely brilliant, and they really drove it forward. And I have to say, the commitment from His Majesty held a reception beforehand, got a number of companies that were involved in the UK to sign up to a plastic statement as well, was incredibly helpful going into there. So we went in there with a very ambitious, very united commitment to the Plastics Treaty. I'm not going to pretend it's not disappointing that it wasn't agreed internationally, but we fight on, we keep going, and we go again, and we hope that we'll get there eventually, because it's incredibly important that we have this, and more countries that recognise that, the better. So I met with the Ecuadorian ambassador, who's obviously leading the treaty, only a couple of weeks ago, to talk about what more we can do as the UK, how we can show global leadership, and how we can use our position to hopefully try and influence as many countries as we possibly can to agree with us that this is a great treaty. But we're completely committed to it, and hopefully we'll get that international agreement when we go back to negotiations again.
So you feel that we are taking a lead on this? In what specific ways would you say that we are managing to show leadership in that? And what kind of timeline do they have in terms of trying to put this back to an agreement?
Well, I have to apologise if I'm slightly mindful about how I talk about negotiations that are going on in the background, so apologies for that. But conversations are happening with other countries where we have allegiances and alliances, and those conversations are going on at the moment. In any, I suppose, like you would ahead of any negotiation, you try and align as many people as possible. Negotiations are going to resume formally in August, hoping there might be an opportunity to bump into a few people in the June conference as well and continue these conversations. But I genuinely feel the UK has been leading on this. We're part of the High Ambition Coalition. We had, you don't get much higher than the support of His Majesty hosting a reception to invite and influence lots of people, in terms of the weight behind what we're trying to do here. So we've had complete commitment as a country, and I think it's something we should all feel proud of.
Thank you.
Thank you. And Baroness Hardy, to Baroness Hardy, I'm ennobling you. Minister Hardy, I should say, one of my diligent colleagues, has shared a tweet from your boss, Secretary of State Steve Reid, from before the election, saying that Britain's marine life is under threat thanks to this Conservative government. Labour will stop destructive bottom trawling, destroying ocean ecosystems. I may have even retweeted it myself. So now we're here, notwithstanding what you've said. I mean, does that still, it's pretty unequivocal language, that tweet. Is that still the policy? And if so, when will it have been delivered by, do you think?
I think if I hadn't got rid of my Twitter account, I probably would have retweeted it myself too. It goes back to the conversation we were having about the Stage 3 bylaws and when we can get those passed. We're committed to not having bottom trawling in areas that damage the MPAs, especially when the features when it's attached to a feature that we're trying to protect. I think we've heard on the committee today there's a balancing of different interests, but I know it's frustrating, and I recognise the frustration that we haven't brought those bylaws in yet. I take that and I understand that, and I hear it regularly. All I can say is that we are looking at this really carefully. As soon as I bring those forward, I will make sure I inform the committee straight away, but I do feel it's important that we get this right. And so forgive me.
The policy hasn't changed. The delay is on clarifying what Mr. Reid meant when he tweeted that.
No, so the policy hasn't changed. The delay is on making sure that I'm making the right decision and that I have all the evidence required to make the best decision. And I'd rather spend a little bit longer, a few more months doing that, than make a decision that I would regret later on.
Okay, well, thank you very much indeed, both of you. It's been a difficult session in terms of having to go off for votes. We're very grateful to you both for extending the time you had originally allocated and returning. So thank you very much indeed, both of you and your colleagues.
Thank you.
Ended.